Okay, so today I'm going to talk about how to give a research talk. And this is really material, even though I think there's 5 names on here, right? I've probably cobbled together material now from 10 or 15 different people on what makes good talks. I'm not going to actually try and make it just one way. There's really 2 or 3 different ways of giving talks, because what's a good talk depends on what's the venue and who you're talking to and what you're doing. So don't view it as it's a formula, it's a set of formulas that you can use. And then after that, I'm actually going to talk today a little bit about at least part of my research. So I'll give you one of my research talks. And then you can criticize me for not following all the advice that's in here. So giving a good talk is really a very important skill, right? And when you go out for a job, right, your research talk is probably among the top 2 things that matter, the other being your resume. Right? If your resume gets you in the door, but the job talk is what gets you the job. Because getting you in the door is generally a small search committee that gets you through 3 or 4 people that say, yeah, then we'll do this, then they'll do a phone interview. But most of the faculty or most of the hiring group in whatever organization you go to will be part of your job talk. And so you really want to nail that talk. But even before then, when you get to giving a research talk at a conference or workshop, right, it's the beginning of getting people really excited about your work. So it's very important. So what is your talk for? What do you want to put in it and what not to put in it? And then a little bit about how to present it. Many research talks are really poor. Right? So the good thing is they're so bad, it's not hard to be good.
We set the bar so low.
Some are really good, and lots are really bad. Right? So I want to get you into that category of good. Really good will take more time. That's beyond me. I'm only in the good category. I can't get you to really good. But everyone benefits from you giving a good talk. Your audience is happier. You're more likely to get promoted, to get job offers, and more people are likely to care about and cite your work if you get to give a good talk. So because a good research talk gives you access to some of the world's most priceless commodity, the time and the attention of other people, you don't want to waste it. So this is an opportunity to get out there and give this. In this class, your talk is not going to the world's best audience, but you are going to get a chance to practice and get feedback on what you're going to do. Okay, so what is your talk for? So given that you have a paper at a conference, what's the whole point of a talk?
Talk about your research.
Talk about your research.
And you'll inspire.
Okay, so I like to think of it in marketing terms, right? So your paper is the beef. Your talk is the sizzle. You're advertising the beef. The goal of your talk at most conferences is to get people to actually look at your paper, right? It is not to replace your paper. It is absolutely not to drone through all the equations in your paper. It is to get them excited enough to go read your paper. Instead of them having to look at the abstract and buy in, you now get to advertise for a little bit. And in the world of marketing, right, you don't actually sell the meal, you sell the sizzle. Right? That's sort of advertising term. You get people to want to go find the meal, right? And you don't want to confuse the two. Your talk doesn't have to cover everything that's in your paper. Your talk has to excite the audience to go look at it. So now the question is, what's the scale of your talk? Because they're not all the same. When you're giving a 1 to 3 minute talk, which a lot of conferences have what we call spotlights or shorts, and they're often a 1 to 3 minute. Right? In 1 to 3 minutes, you don't even begin to think you can talk about your paper. You're going to show them there's one idea, and even if you have 10, there's one idea, and here's why they have to go read your paper, because that's all you're really trying to do at a 1 to 3 minute talk. But you have to have enough in there to attract different members of the audience, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. 5 minute, what we would call a short, is a little bit about why you're solving this problem and what's the most important part of your paper. You get to a 10 minute, a little bit of why, a little bit more, and then a little bit of how, right? So until you get to a 10 minute talk, you don't explain how you did anything. You only describe why and what, maybe what they care about. A 20 minute long, 20 to 30 minute would be a long oral, what it is, why it is, how it works, and how it fails, and then maybe some details about how you do some of this. Right? The question for these longer talks is, what are you going to give them that even if they don't read your paper, will get them to think about and cite your work? The other ones are all about getting them to read your work. And then if you have a job talk, it's who, what, why, and other things you can do. Part of your job talk isn't just, here's what I've done, but here's where I'm going to go in the future. and that's a different part of the talk. So the purpose is not to impress your audience with your brain power, to tell them all you know about a topic, or to present all the technical details, right? It might be nice if they're impressed with you, but if you try, you will probably fail. The one thing I will come back to that is you don't want to undersell your brain power too much. You don't want to make self-deprecating jokes that make you sound stupid. You don't want to make it sound as though anyone could have done this, because then they don't respect you at the same level. And there might be a reason to have a math slide. I'll go through one of those when I give you back my talk. The purpose of your talk is to give your audience an intuitive feel for your idea, to make them foam at the mouth with eagerness to read your paper. In fact, we can tell at our CDPR, the conference we run, I also run the networking, so I get to look at statistics. We run our own open source website, and we can actually tell how many people are downloading this talk's paper during this talk, right? And what's interesting is there are talks where something on the order of 1,000 people download the talk, or the paper during the talk. And there's others where there's like 5, right? And the numbers are hugely different when it's like, well, this talk, like 4 or 5 people bother to read the paper, this one, like half the audience or a quarter of the audience went after, right? So a lot depends on what's going to go on. You want to engage in psych and provoke them, and you really want to make them glad they came. If they come out of your talk thinking that was a waste of my time, you have not only not gained them, you have lost, right? Because now they don't respect you as much, right? The worst you should hope for is they come out saying, well, not my area, but at least it was okay, right? As opposed to, that was a horrible talk, right? When you see people getting up and leaving the talk, right, in the middle of it, it's always a bad sign. If you're right before lunch, well, it might just be they're trying to get in front of it early, but right, you want people that don't want to leave during your talk. The audience you might like to think you would have, right, have read all of your earlier papers, thoroughly understand all the relevant theory of Cartesian closed endomorphic bifurcators that you're working on, are all agog to hear about the latest developments in your work, and are fresh, alert, and ready for action. But that is probably a very small audience. And if that's your audience, they probably will have read it anyhow. Because if they know all of this stuff, if they like your development, they're going to read it anyhow, right? That's, even if that person is in the audience, that's not who you're talking to. And that only person might be your mother or your advisor anyhow. The audience you're going to get probably has never heard of you, probably has never even heard of your sub-area, or they probably wish they hadn't. And they just had lunch, and so they're ready for a doze, right? So this is a more realistic average audience. This is probably how they're behaving, right? So their body language is they're falling asleep, they're not really paying attention. In today's world, you can tell this is an older photo. How do you know that's an older photo?
Both what people are wearing.
Yeah, there's a little bit of
and
that.
their styles.
A little bit of that too, right? The other is like not a single one has their phone or laptop out. Your audience will be full of people for which there are screens looking at themselves, right?
And it's usually circular tables, so there's side conversations going on too.
Circular tables means a smaller audience. Right?
Yeah.
And larger conferences and workshops tend to be set theater style, so there are rows and rows of people.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, it also depends on how big, right? So again, I'm used to, but even our small conference like WACFE, where we have like 200 people, right? We always sit theater style because it takes less space to have that many people sitting around.
Usually the only thing they give you is, like when you're setting up conference venues, they'll either give you theater seating or rounds. And the rounds are like 10-foot tables that take a lot of space.
Yeah. So some will do classroom. We've been in some, in fact, a couple of our conferences, we do like 4 rows of classroom and then everything else is theater after that. Because there are some people who really want their laptops to work. But yeah, so that's your audience, and so what is one of your primary jobs? Pretty much, right? You want to wake them up and make them glad you did. Right? So if you're going to do this, you've got to tell a story, right? You want to prepare your material so that it tells a story logically. Okay, you want to have examples, anecdotes, and significant details. We'll come back to again, some of that is very much, but you want to create the continuity so that your slides flow smoothly. You want the story to flow as it's going along. You can have abrupt changes as long as you can tell them in a story in a way that gets there. We'll get back to that. You You want to guide your audience through that story, and your last point on one slide can anticipate the next slide. So one of the things you can do is you can effectively segue to make two things that seem radically unconnected, connected. You start telling the story of the next slide before you even get there, so that they know what you're going to try and put in before they see it, so it doesn't seem like an abrupt change. So by then you know what to put in. You want to connect them, and you've told that story to connect them. So my formula for what goes in your paper: 20% motivation, 70% a part of, but not all of your key idea, and 10% impact. And the 70% and how much of that part of your key idea, this works if it's a 3-minute talk, okay? At a 30-minute talk, you can have a lot more of your idea and your impact, and part of your key idea becomes, how do I show that my idea really works? In a 10-minute talk, I would expect some experiments, maybe even a 5-minute talk. A little bit of experiments, 10 a lot, 20 minutes, lots of experimentation to support the idea, okay? But the most important thing is to start with motivation, because if they don't care about your problem, they tune out for the rest of it. So you've got to catch them, you've got to make them care about your problem, and while it may be really important to you, it may not be important to them. If it was, then you know exactly who they are, because they'd already be working on this problem. And you probably know all of those, and they're not the ones you're worrying about. It's everyone else in the room that you really want to worry about. So your structure is a basic rule. You say what you're going to say, 1 to 3 main points in the motivation, then you're going to say it, give the talk's key ideas, and then say what is the impact of what you said. Don't just repeat at the end, here's what I said, here's the impact, what does it really mean? Okay? Don't try and build suspense and then unveil a surprise ending. That sometimes works for a few people, but for most people that's really hard to carry off, because it's really hard to keep people in suspense for long and to keep them caring without knowing what the answers are going to be. So I go for the simpler formula, which works for most people, which is tell them what you're going to say, right? So that now they care, right? You're going to motivate it, so it's there, and then you're going to get into it and then come back to it, right? So for most people, you have 15 seconds for that before they judge you, and 2 minutes to engage your audience before they tune out. Now, one of the reasons a 1 or 2 minute talk works is because they don't have enough time to completely tune out. But after that, right, but in the first 10 to 15 seconds, they're already starting to judge you. So if you haven't captured them, if you show me for the first 15 seconds a bulleted outline of everything you're going to tell me, right, you're already losing me, because it's like, oh, that's not very exciting. Even if you're going to give me that, here's the items you're going to see, make it interesting to show it to me. Don't give me a list of bullets in text. What?
I keep getting like other people, like people have differing
Oh, yeah,
opinions
yeah.
about the outline. Because some people, it's like, I don't know where I'm going in your talk unless you tell me the outline of why you're talking about this.
Well, so I'm not saying not to give them an outline,
Okay.
but you don't have to give them an outline in textual form, right? I can have an outline with 5 pictures. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this, and I'm connect them, right? So you can make that outline interesting for the people that don't want to read text, right? While still giving the people who feel they need the outline, the outline. And for a 10-minute talk or a 15-minute talk, an outline's not such a bad thing, right? But you can still make it more interesting.
Have you seen any adoption to a significant degree to Prezi at technical conferences?
Nope.
Yes.
Okay.
I've
Just
seen
curious.
them at hacker conferences, not
It starts
much
making me
academic,
dizzy.
Right, in fact, so-
To be honest.
which needs to be like specified.
Yeah, so at more technical academic conferences, you tend to see a lot less of it. One is because you better count on your network working.
Right.
And one of the things that I strongly recommend is,
We can't get them working?
well, so
Internet costs money.
it's not just that it costs money, it's right, when you're in a room with 1,000 other people,
Oh,
your
fine,
bandwidth
access.
may be somewhat limited. So when we get requests for people to, and we have had one of our keynotes use Prezi in the last 4 years, and we had to give them a hard line just to make sure it would work. Because it's the only way to ensure, right?
Right, Wi-Fi hotspots might be over bandwidth.
Well, so again, our main conference, right, when we have a keynote, right, there's 3,000 people in the room or 8,000 people in the room.
All checking that.
Wi-Fi doesn't work, right? Even cell phones don't work really well at that. I mean, they work enough that you might check your email by, okay, oh look, a new message, right? You don't want your presentation. So my suggestion, if you're ever not sure about that, which is what we've also seen a little bit of, so all of the main talks for CVPR for the last 3 or 4 years, we have given people exactly one choice for their presentation. You get to give us an MPEG-4 video.
Okay.
And whatever's in your video, we play your video and you talk. It is absolutely timed because there's a video running.
Right, yeah.
Your timing is right. There's no technical glitches and whatever. And when you're trying to get through lots of talks, right, we had lots of complaints about it at the beginning, but afterwards, even some of the faculty who complained about it up front said it was actually really good because it forced my student to get up there and stay on timing and stay on point and practice because they were so afraid. Where before they would wing it, right? And then they have a 5-minute talk and they're through 3 minutes of content and the time's up, right? So,
Timing is hard. Timing is hard.
timing is hard, right? So having your video, so it goes right, and like in the instructions I send out, it's like, we recommend you not only make the video, you have to upload it to us like a week ahead of time so we can test them all, make sure they all work. My recommendation is put it on your phone and watch it 30 times, right? Your timing becomes natural because you've memorized it without actually working hard at memorizing. You just keep listening to it enough, you know what comes next. You don't even have to think about it, it flows. So that's the other thing. So like if somebody wanted to do President or conference in the last couple of years,
Yeah, we just
I wouldn't even notice. It's them recording what's going on. It's like, okay, I'd have to pay attention to exactly what was happening on their slides. But having been to way too many conferences where the networking breaks down, you really don't want to. I find that even more likely at a hacker conference where just for fun somebody would probably be
Somebody
hacking.
wants to break it down.
And it's like, oh look, he's using Prezi. Let's have fun. Denial of service attack.
I mean, it happens enough in the CTS. I'm doing really good. I'm gonna DDoS the network so nobody else can get me flags. Yes.
But isn't that against the rules and get you kicked out?
If you get caught.
If you get caught, yeah. Yeah, but at a conference, there's not even the official rules. It's like, okay, somebody's giving a talk, let's make them look bad. So. Anyway, back to this. So, when people first look at it, they're looking, why should I tune into this talk? What's the problem? Is it an interesting problem? Does this talk describe a worthwhile event? So, some of your comment about the outline is related to those people who's like, what's in this talk, right? Should I be paying attention? I want to know what you're going to tell me, right? And what I'm saying is, you can tell them that without giving them here's the outline of the slide. So, motivation, right? So, have we talked about motivation and story before in this class? Yes, right? So, your motivation should really end with a one-sentence version of your story. The bare-bone elements with the 8 essential elements, something needed because, but, so, finally, right? You take that sentence, you expand it to your talk, right? And that literally becomes like the last sentence or the first sentence of your motivation, depending on how long you get to give your talk for. Right? And if you're giving a 1-minute talk, that is the first sentence and the end of your motivation, then you're on to what your results are, right? In fact, if I have needed, whatever, because, but, so, right, I'm actually getting because of this, but here's how I solved it, so here's whatever, and finally here's the result, right? This covers the entire thing of your paper. So your key idea, if the audience remembers only one thing from your talk, what should it be? And you should think very hard about that. You might have 3 or 4 things you want to talk about, but you should make it clear, and you should literally make it clear to them, if there's one thing you're going to remember from today, remember this. You must identify the key idea. What I did this summer, or what I did over the last year of my research, that's not good, right? That's not an idea, right? Be specific. Don't let your audience have to try and figure out what's important for themselves. Be absolutely specific. If you remember nothing else, remember this, or the key idea is. Now, if you have a very fragmented audience, you can actually say, so if you're working on this part of the problem, here's the key idea. And if you're working over here, this is the key idea. You can have 4 different audiences, but you should not have more than 1 idea per audience. So if you're splitting your audience up, you can get to 2. Organize your talk around a specific goal. Ruthlessly prune out material that is irrelevant to this goal, especially for very short talk. If you're 30 minutes, you can probably get into things. Here's the key idea. Here's the experiments that prove it works. I've got 2 things in there. One is about experimentation. But you really want to keep it very focused. So when it comes to a talk, narrow, deep beats wide and shallow, right? So the worst thing you want to have a talk is that is both now narrow and shallow. This is better, where I have something that starts a little bit broad and then goes pretty deep, right? Better, which we've already seen, Oscar structure, right? We want to start wide, narrow down to some pieces, and then broaden back out. If I don't start wide enough, I don't necessarily capture a lot of people. But if you're giving a job talk or a technical talk, you have to go deep enough for people to respect the idea, okay? But not necessarily end in a narrow sense. You want to broaden it back out when you're talking about the impact. So you got to get back to what's going on inside of my work. Avoid really shallow overviews. If your audience cares about your problem, the shallow overview is going to turn them off. If they don't care about the problem, it's more important to motivate them than to give them an overview, right? So a lot of the related work in the background, it's still good to have a related work slide, but you can go through that pretty quickly just to put stuff in context and for people to say, oh yes, I've seen that paper, or this is related to them. Cut quickly to the chase, the technical meat of what you're going to do. Best is some quick context, meat, and then a broad impact at the end, which is sort of the structure we talked about for our paper as well. So in that sense, your talk is like your paper, but there's a significant difference about what's going on in that middle content. You don't want to be going through lots of formulas and details. You might have one or two, but you're not going to go through near the detail you have in your paper. So examples and stories are your main weapon, and this allows your talk to differentiate itself from the paper, where you will often have much more details and analysis. You're going to use this story or example to motivate your work, to convey the basic intuition, to illustrate the idea in action, show extreme cases, and to highlight shortcomings. When time is short, omit the details, not the example. Right? And oddly enough, in your paper, when space is short, you tend to omit the examples and include the details. Right? And this makes them complementary. It's an especially good place to think about having examples of failure. Right? That actually helps people understand what's going on. You didn't want to include, when you were submitting your paper, anything about when your system failed, or not much about your system failing, because then it increases the chance they'll beat you up for exactly what you showed them. In your talk, it's now accepted, and you want to show them some of the limitations, and that will sort of get them interested. But I like to think of your talk as having a ton of pictures to explain the ideas, and forgetting the details if you have to. No idea what this next slide is from, but so what to leave out? This is actually probably the more important part of making a good talk, is not what to put in, but because unless you have a very long talk, it's mostly what do I have to leave out, and how do I make that decision? So skip the outline of your talk, unless it's greater than 30 minutes, especially as a textual thing like this. If you do have this, right, have it graphically. The outline of your talk conveys near zero information at the start. Worse, since your audience only gives you about 2 minutes before you're dozing out, just lose them. So if you are going to have your outline in a long talk, put it up front, but not at the beginning. So in fact, one of the places I like to do is, if I think of my talk as having like 5 sections, I finish the first section, and then I put up the outline to sort of show them where the rest of it's going. And then you can have those as signposts, as points to pause during the talk and whatever, and give this. So I'll often have a slide that shows where I am, and then I'll like gray out sections as I get going. But I don't show that in the very beginning. I show that like 2 minutes into the talk, because first I want to get them motivated and excited about the broad problem, and then I'm going to jump into the details. So that's the other way of doing it. And then, as I said, I like to have a graphical version of some of that stuff instead of just text. And by using either graying out, or another one which I've seen, but it's a lot more work, so I rarely use myself, I'm too lazy, is sort of like a bar going across the bottom where people like add things in, and then you have your sort of overview talk. That works really well with the graphics, where I sort of have like a graphic, and then the bar that shows up with it, the next graphic, and so then you sort of get them, but it's visually a lot more interesting that way. So related work, it's good to have some of this with a couple of acronyms. Don't use square brackets and numbers that you have in your paper, because no one will remember what that is. My recommendation is either APA, or if you have lots of them, at least alphanumeric, so I can sort of say who the names are and people will remember them. But realistically, would this be an interesting slide in your talk? Remember, the whole section of this talk, part of the talk is what's leave out. So, yeah, don't do that. If you're going to do references at all in the related work, you don't present them, right? You know the related work. You acknowledge co-authors in the slide and precursors as you go along. So you might have a slide, and on that slide, you might have one of these, right? Builds on PN 93, okay? That's okay, but you don't have like a whole thing on related work. Don't forget on acknowledgements, cite on the slides, right? This is actually really important, and this is a place where you both get to build credibility, even if you never say it. Citing somebody on your slides makes them feel good, right? They might have come to your talk to listen to your work because it's related to theirs, and they wanted to hear that you acknowledge their work, right? So it's good to do that. You often don't have time to say everything. So you can literally have stuff on the bottom of the slides that you never say, right? Builds on the work of whatever, right? You get that up. In the government space, if you were funded, your government funding number should be on your talk someplace, right? Even if you never say it out loud, it should be, supported by NSF and a bunch of others. They get annoyed when you're not. Praise the opposition. A little bit like in the paper, but it's actually easier and maybe more important in your talk to do this. X's very interesting work does Y, I've extended this to do Z, right? It takes you very little to add that sentence, and it gets everyone who is associated with X to look at your work and think, okay, this guy's acknowledging us, whatever, and does some other interesting work, Y. So people who recognize that. This is the other reason this is important, because it gives them instant context. If you liked X's paper on Y, you're going to like my stuff. Right? And so that's part of what you're trying to do, is get them to buy in. Okay, so things like this, technical rules and formulas. Okay? Depends on who your audience is. I like to do, if I do a slide like this, and I may do one when I do my talk, it'll be, and there's a lot of formulas in the paper for those who want to go through the details, read on. Right? Okay? You get to put up that there really is some math. And the reason for that is there are definitely people in subfields of every field that really love the math. You don't want to come across as, I avoid it, I'm not good at it, right? But it's also not what's interesting for the talk, right? And if you had a poster, it's like, we have lots of details in the paper, come talk to us about those at the poster, but now I'm going to stick with the intuition, right? Omit the technical details, right? It may have taken you hours to do those things, weeks, whatever, right? Specific the things that people will refer to it and bring them back to your paper or poster if you have one. Do have some backup slides to use in the responsive questions, especially if you're in a venue known for having questions and sometimes aggressive questions. You don't want to try and defend your math hand-wavy, right? You want to be able to slide that back up there and say, oh, you mean this here? Here's how we go through this, right? So for a short talk in a very interactive venue, you might have as many backup slides as you have primary slides. You don't practice them, but taking the thing, basically take all the formulas you have in your paper, and my recommendation is every major formula should be in one of your backup slides in case somebody asks you. Now, if you're in a venue that's known for not asking questions, then don't waste your time. But, I think it's actually good to do, even if you're going to have them in your poster, because you always pull out your laptop and talk through them. Or if they're on your poster, then they're not there. They're just, and then you can easily say, that's too detailed a question for the general audience. Why don't you come to my poster and you not go through that, right? Gives you something in the middle. When do you do the video?
What do you do the video?
Oh, so like how do you do back and forth? So we don't allow any audiovisual during the Q&A session of our conference. So questions. So this year we're doing something different, but last year your questions were saved up. So 3 people talk, and then there's one set of Q&A for all 3. We're doing I guess we're doing that again this year. One year we did 5, right? And the reason for that is it's also embarrassing if no one asks you any questions, right? And so out of 3 talks, there's at least 1 question. That can consume the entire period or not, but then they sort of prioritize what's going to go on. But our sessions tend to be related papers, and so it's also like if the first paper asks something, the second may actually be related to it, and so it's better to sort of see them in context, and then all of them come together, and now I'm asking questions. In fact, it allows you to ask questions. So speaker 2, right, your paper was arguing very differently than speaker 1. Can you comment on that, right? But you've seen them in all 3 of them before you get to that level of questions.
That's interesting. You have like the opportunity for a battle royale
In front of the audience, right? So, but the other reason we did it is actually because the audience is so big, it's hard to get questions. Audiences of 50 to 200, it's pretty easy to get people to ask questions. There's always 1 or 2 questioners that feel like they'll step up and do it. But when you get to 2,000 people in a room, it's actually much harder to get anyone to ask a question because there's this huge audience. And so it's like, is my question going to make me look dumb?
So you've heard of the big conflict that happened between Jurgen and Goodfellow, right? So Goodfellow is the guy who came up with the GANs.
Yes.
And in the 2016 conference for NIPS, he was doing a tutorial. Jurgen, yeah, I can't pronounce his name, he's Swedish. He stood up in the middle of the presentation, got the mic, and he started asking, yes, I was one of the reviewers on your conference paper, and I raised the concern that you didn't mention my work, and can you tell us how it is related right now during this conference here? So like there was this whole call out that happened.
Wow.
There's a whole YouTube video.
Well, there's been a couple of them, call outs. Like there was on Twitter, was it Bertizio Biglio from Italy? There was he does the transferability black box stuff. Somebody done a related work section and did not cite him and his initial, work, and he got all up in arms over social media on this new researcher about how they didn't reference him, so they must not know the area because they didn't reference his work.
Yeah, so those, like this year, I said we were doing something different, I can't remember. This year we decided we're not gonna let anyone ask questions. They're gonna have to,
They'll have to submit their questions in advance.
well, no, the questions will be submitted through our app. And then the session chair will get to choose which questions. Because we've had some where, in fact, almost like yours, where it wasn't really a question, where it was an attack.
Yeah,
right? And it's just not
that's the thing.
appropriate. Well, we had one where the attack wasn't even like subtle. It was like, well, your company is losing lots of good researchers to ours. So can you tell us what you're doing to make people feel more welcome at work or something? It's like,
That's not related.
it had nothing to do with the talk, right? So, yes, and so we're trying to,
attack.
yes, literally just an attack.
I saw Linus Torvalds attack like NVIDIA in one of his talks.
Oh, wow.
Like he was really horrible.
Well, giving it in your talk, right, he gets the stage, that's different, but someone taking like the question and answer period, and using it to really just attack somebody, right, it just isn't appropriate.
It's totally inappropriate.
Right, but the other reason we want to do it is so we can also prioritize which questions and whatever, and sort of get them, see what's going on. And then we also want to be able to give if there are more questions, some sessions have more questions we have time for, then we can at least give the authors, here's the questions, and maybe they can answer them online later and whatever. We're always experimenting with new ideas.
You're gonna need to with all the thousands of people that keep going.
Yeah. So, presenting your talk. So, your most potent weapon by far is? No? Although your ideas, your enthusiasm, right? The energy you bring to your talk.
Patience.
Patience is an important thing, but during your talk. If you are energetic, if you portray energy and passion, it's contagious. People are more likely to stay awake if you're energetic. They're more likely to be listening to you. And therefore, from your talk point of view, that is one of the things you have to do. And it's one where you have to be practiced at enthusiasm. If you're not actually enthusiastic, you're going to have to practice this, right? Yes, right? Because you don't convey enthusiasm. You're quiet. You're right? So if you don't seem excited by your idea, why will the audience be, right? It wakes them up. If you can get the energy that comes with this, right? Enthusiasm.
I was going to ask you about passive enthusiasm.
So,
Can I be passively enthusiastic?
So passive enthusiasm is not what we mean by enthusiasm. You can be passively enthusiastic But here you have to have active enthusiasm to get your audience engaged, right? You don't actually have to be enthused. You just have to act enthused. Right? If you're selling it, that's enough, right? In my guess is if you get loosened up and breathing and moving around, and you seem energetic, it actually makes you more energetic, and it leads to a more positive thing, right? So we can have a little bit of fun when you're giving your practice talks. One of the things that I like to do, especially for my students who are more nervous, is I make them yell by like turning up noise in the lab. So we'll have some music going, and now I got to hear you over that. They're just, if you have to talk over, but if you think about it, if you're in a room with 200 people, there might be 20 or 30 whispering. It's not actually that hard. You're going to want to crank up the volume. It's true they might give you a microphone, and you have to learn how to use the microphone and keep it at the right volume.
Not do it
But-
like this, where you like look
Yeah,
around.
you definitely don't want to be doing this when the microphone is over here, right? You got to be focused on that. But if you can bring the energy to the microphone, then it becomes way easier. Everything is much easier. And I am not naturally outgoing. It may not seem that way now. I've practiced for a long time. But when I was in high school, I was so petrified of being in front of people and talking that I joined the theater group, sort of student theater group, but I couldn't have speaking roles. So I played like Toto in The Wizard of Oz and Igor in Young Frankenstein or whatever, because I was too just being on stage with that big crowd up there was petrifying enough, right? So you have to work your way up. But it is a thing that if you practice and practice, you get better at it, right? And so that's my suggestion. Just go out and practice. If you really need to, go to a karaoke bar. I don't actually recommend drinking, but most of the people there are, so they won't notice if you just act a little bit foolish and seem enthusiastic. They will just assume you're drunk, so it's okay.
It's not about you drank.
I don't think that works at academic. Don't pretend to be drunk.
No, but what I'm saying is, but your goal is to be enthusiastic and energetic, right? Don't worry about it, right? I'm just saying you can go, this is a place you can go practice and not feel like the crowd will be judging you too much, because most of them are drunk and they're bad. So, and if you actually do karaoke, so in my undergraduate class when we do presentations, when I teach it, I make them all do karaoke. I make them take a song they know.
At an actual place, or you have a karaoke machine?
No, actually, I make them videotape it and upload it to YouTube.
Excellent.
And if you Google on YouTube, you will find an example of me doing it. And I am
I
terrible.
can't believe Dr. Bolt made me do this.
Well, so I don't make them make it public. I make them, they can be unlisted, but one, I want them to all practice, but also, the advantage of karaoke is, if you're singing a song you know by heart, because it's a song you love, you already have all the content down. You can focus just on energy and presentation. Right? Can I look at the camera if I'm doing a recording? Can I look at the audience, right? An important part of enthusiasm is to actually make contact with people. Okay? So you want to get them going. Okay? Lots of people like this idea that ideas will occur to you during the conference. You obsess on your talk during the other people's presentations. You want to make it fresh and updated just before you give it. Okay? There's a lot of academics who take that attitude, to which I say, malarkey. Right? You can bring energy and enthusiasm, and to be honest, I can even change my content on the fly, but I shouldn't have to. Okay? Your talk absolutely must be fresh in your mind, so review it the day before. As I said, review it 15 times. The more nervous you are, the more you want something to make sure you've practiced it a lot of times, and something to keep you on time, which is why we are finding having these pre-recorded videos helps the students a lot. They might continually lag the video, or they may stop and let the video catch up because they're going too fast, but they can't get wildly out of pace because the videos help them slow down. And if you find yourself stopping and continuing, you know you're going too fast, and you just got to relax and slow down. And if you're really good at talks, yes, you can adapt to the presentation. But if you're not, then don't worry about it. Okay, technology. My recommendation is borrow a laser pointer, but actually avoid using it. You're much better off if you can point with a mouse, right? Which has the advantage when you're giving your talk, that if I'm pointing with my mouse, then first, it's big, it's on the screen. If they're recording you, it is recorded. But the other is my screen in this classroom is bad. Right? Normally my screen is facing the audience, and so if I'm looking at my computer screen, I'm looking towards the audience. If I'm using the laser pointer, and the screen is over here, that means I have turned around, right? Which is the worst thing I want to do, which is the other reason the mouse is good. The other good thing about the mouse is if you're doing it right, you can practice without having to have a projector. Right? It's like, I'm going to look at this, I can practice what's going on. PowerPoint has these various modes where I can, like, so now I have, so in presenter mode, which actually is something you should practice if you're going to use it right. So in presenter mode, when I put the laser pointer down here, it shows up on my slide. If I actually make it a mouse, right, my mouse is over my screen here, you can't see anything, I have to move it over here. Right? So, but if you practice that and know that if I put it in, the other is I can do the pen, and then when I go, where's my mouse, right, I can then write on stuff and leave marks, so you get some choices in those. So you should understand and practice those things, so you can sort of keep track of what's going on. Okay. Better yet, if you do things aggressively or do things well, you don't need to point. Now these slides are not, and I'll go through this balance of animation, but I have lots of things whenever I want the audience's attention to look at something, that's the thing that shows up on the screen just as I'm talking about it. It's a lot more effort to make all of that happen, but for a short talk and an important talk, it can be very effective. Consider borrowing a wireless laser slide changer or slide pointer, right? So that's actually the best thing of the pointers, if it can advance your slides so you can keep looking at the audience in advance. Test that your laptop works with a projector in advance and just before the presentation session. So I like to make sure that it works, depending on how important it is. The day I get to the conference, I will go check that everything's working. Right before my session, I will check what it's working. I have been in way too many talks where people come up and their laptop no longer works, even though it worked yesterday. Something went wrong. And some of that may be the projector in the room today is not the same as the projector was in the room yesterday. So it works in this one and not in the other one, right? So especially true if you have to change anything to make it work, you want to check all that. Laptops break. Leave a backup copy on the web, bring a backup copy on a USB disk, right? I strongly recommend anytime you go to a conference, you have a copy of your talk on a USB, right? I also recommend the web because you might lose the USB, right? Or they may not, have a USB stick place where you can stick it in and you can just download it, right? So having it someplace you can get to. So when you're giving your talk, never ever apologize saying, I didn't have time to prepare this talk properly. Right? It just sends the wrong message. My computer broke down, so I don't have the results I expected. Also unacceptable kinds of statements. I don't have time to tell you about this one. I'm a little bit balanced on that one. If you really only have a 2-minute talk, you can say, I don't have time to go into the details, I have a poster. Right? It's not quite the same as I don't have time to tell you about this. I just wasted 10 seconds telling you that, but it's like, we don't have time for the details here, come to my poster is an invitation to get them to come, and that's perfectly fine. I don't feel qualified to address this audience. If you don't feel qualified to address them, why are you addressing them, right? That does not help your position. So of these, only the time to tell you about is one to affect. Right? So if you're anything like I was when I was starting, you may experience apparently severe pre-talk symptoms, right? The inability to breathe, the ability to stand up, or the inability to operate your brain, okay? I can tell you these things do go away with practice. And so the answer to make them go away is to practice a lot. In college, to help get over, so I wanted to be a professor, so I already knew I had to figure out how to learn to stand up in front of people. We did lots of exercises, some of which were intimidating. We were in New York City. We went and talked to random strangers on a street corner
In New York.
in New York City with someone carrying, so the video cameras back then were these giant things you carried on your shoulder, right? So you would go get videotaped trying to get information out of strangers in New York City, right? And you just had to keep doing it. And then we would watch the videos and get feedback, right, from the rest of the class. So,
In grad school.
actually, it was an undergrad. So,
Was that approved by IRB? You're interacting with people.
but it was human-centered research, right? It was just like going out in public. So it was tough, right? But I felt I had to do this to get over this, right? So, and after a little while, it really doesn't take that long to recognize two things that are going to occur to you, right? First, the inability to breathe is very easy to manage. It literally is a panic attack. The more you face that fear, the less that will be, as long as you keep reminding yourself, no one here is going to kill me. That was more difficult when we did that same exercise in parts of New York City than other parts. But it was still a good exercise, right? The rest of this, like the inability to stand up and you just can't think after you practice it. But I can tell you that the other way I got around lots of this is I quickly learned a lesson from that class, which was when these things happen, the reason you're doing it is you're afraid of looking bad in front of people. These make you look worse. Right? If I'm in front of people and I can't talk, right, I look much worse. And so it's like the little rational part of your brain is saying, no, I can't look bad. I have to not look bad. So as soon as you can get in front of them, the disadvantage of that thought process was you run away. You don't face them. But if you're in this class, you're going to have to learn to face them. So just go face them and recognize the worst thing you can do is look panicked. Right? So you might as well start acting, which is part of why I started to paint and patch the skid things in high school. I recognized I don't have to be me in front of a crowd. I can pretend to be somebody else. Right? If I can act like somebody else, so I chose a particular person that I wanted to act like and act like them. And if you really struggle, you can do what I did for a bunch of my interviews in the streets of New York. I spoke with a British accent and I looked like a fool, but then it wasn't me at all because no one knew what I was doing. And it made it a little bit more fun and it helped me get over myself. Right? You can't take yourself too seriously when you're doing a Monty Python accent, right? And neither can anyone else. But that was my way of working through it. But
it was actually an experiment that they did, and it was kind of like just taking random people and having them do rock songs. And in one scenario, they had them wear like a funny hat and this type of stuff. And then after they did the practice in front of people, they put them in front of a huge crowd. The ones that had the funny hat, because it was more embarrassing, always performed better. Because it was just like, you just got over yourself.
You get over yourself pretty quickly, yeah. So.
What about the syndrome where you completely forget everything you say while you're saying it on stage and totally don't remember anything you said while you were on stage?
What goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas.
I have that one. That one's a good one.
So that feeds back into if you're saying the things that you've practiced so many times you can say them without thinking, then you know what you probably said because you just followed the script, right? And just went along with it, right? You don't have to worry as much about it. But that still is fear-based, right? The more you face your fears, in general, the less fearsome they become. Now, and one other thing that was part of our class in getting us through this was it is much better to face your fears with a friend, right? So find a partner, right, who's going to be supportive, right, and have them go with you, right, and then they can help be supportive of you and then take turns. So when we did this interview, one person was the camera person and their job was actually to also be the supportive person while one person was doing the interviews. And we didn't swap during the day. You were in a role. You're the cameraman, you're the interviewer, and you just go through that process. So that's another way to help make it up. Find somebody who will be supportive. In our class, they were all people who were largely petrified of public speaking, because that was like the name of the class, public speaking for something, I can't remember what it was, but so practice that. And after enough practice, you may not feel comfortable, but you will continue to increase your comfort level. You just won't notice it as much. So, as I said, so first, deep breathing during the previous talk. So if you run out of breath, right, part of that is because your fear makes you either hyperventilate or stop breathing. Deep breathing, where you actually take in long, inhale and exhale deeply, right, can help. Script your first few sentences precisely. My view is, 5-minute talk, you can have the entire thing prescripted, right? No brain is required, right? You could literally do this, and from a practice point of view, where you can get somebody so they say one sentence out of this, and you should just be responding. What is the next one? You don't have to think about it and looking at notes. If you have learned it that well, and if you think this is hard, and I have lots of students who would tell me, that's too hard. I can take any song they know well enough, right? You give them one line of prompt from the middle of the song, they know what the next line is, right? If you ask them what's this line of the song, they may not know. But if you sing one line, you know what the next one is. Use timed talks videos. As I already said, that's one of my strong recommendations. If you have that practiced and you listen to it over and over again, you will get to learn it well enough. Practice, and maybe practice with flying objects. For my students who are more petrified, I have one I will have to work on this year. The more you're afraid of things, the more this technique helps. So it may sound really silly, but when you give your practice talk, we will throw random things at you. Right? And you have to duck or catch them or whatever. Part of this is keeping you off balance, but part of it is to recognize that you're thinking about lots of things, right? And you can actually handle, right? And by the way, the absolute worst thing that audiences could ever do is throw things at you. I've never been at a conference where someone has, right? But if you can catch it when it does, then it's like, okay, you're definitely multitasking and handling all those things. But really, that part of practicing is really just to get you outside of a little bit of your comfort zone and make stuff happen. Move around a lot, use large gestures, wave, right? All of those things, if you're doing this, stand on chairs, right? This is especially true during practice, maybe not during your conference, but yeah, I wouldn't necessarily recommend standing on chairs at the conference, but when you're practicing, standing on a chair, literally giving your talk from up here, right, can actually be useful. Why do you think this is useful for practice? Stage, right? You're up higher, right? When you're giving something, all of a sudden, if I'm down here and then I get up on stage, like everything looks a little bit different. You want to practice like your actual talk will be. I don't recommend walking around a lot on top of the chair though. So walking can be a way of things. But if you walk around a lot, in the beginning it will help with your nerves. But there is a problem of walking around a lot during your talk. Almost every conference you will give at will not give you a wireless microphone that lets you roam the stage, right? Your microphone will be here, so you can't do this. But you can do this. Okay? You can use your arms a lot. Recommendation for lots of people, go to the bathroom before the session. Right? You don't want to have stage fright make you feel, I've got to go now. Okay? You might also balance your coffee and liquid intake, right? So you don't drink like half a gallon of coffee, right? And then you're super jittery and I have to go and whatever, right? So think about how that works with you. By the way, even if you feel these things, you're not a wimp. Most people feel this way. So in a survey of what most people are afraid of, death was number 2.
Public speaking.
What is number 1? Public speaking. Okay, so just don't worry too much about that. Right, so most people would rather be in the casket than the one giving the eulogy. That's really what it plays out. So be prepared. Have your laptop, your USB, whatever you're going to do. And lots of people will feel very afraid of this stuff, so sort of keep all that in mind. If I start throwing up. So in fact, if you really are that nervous that you feel like throwing up, going back to going to the bathroom or whatever, well, I also recommend managing what you eat for lunch. If you are that nervous, the more you actually put in your stomach, the more the chance that you will, and some foods will affect you more than others, but if your stomach is completely empty, you actually feel the knots in your stomach as well. So you want to have some balance, something that actually absorbs lots of stomach acids, carbs, rice, pasta.
Isn't coffee supposed to help you?
Help you what?
To go up in the stage and be foods.
Coffee just helps in general.
So
It's like perfect.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
So a little coffee is fine, but some people drink so much of it that then they are too jittery, they're not focused and whatever. So you got to find the right balance for how much coffee you can drink. Same is true with Coke and whatever, right? There's a balance, right? A little bit of it helps most people. Too much of it doesn't help.
Doesn't sound, yeah, I feel like.
I wouldn't do anything that you don't normally do.
Yeah.
You normally drink, I don't know, 1-2 pots of coffee a day, you're probably fine with that. If you're normally not a coffee drinker and you drink that, that's probably not a good thing.
Yeah, so the one thing about the coffee that I have noticed is that when people are nervous giving their talk, they're often very nervous in the entire conference. And now you're at the coffee break, the session or two before yours, right? And there's all these people. So you just start chugging extra coffee, because if you're drinking, you can't possibly have to talk to people, right? While you're sitting around. So then you drink too much. So do not turn to the screen, right?
Oh, God.
You want to, again, face the audience, point with a laser pointer built into your laptop. Speak to somebody in the back of the room, right? And you've probably all heard this idea, right? You can help make your fears better if you imagine those people naked. That doesn't actually work for most people as far as I can tell. But one of the things I do find that helps, we have lots of students that are very afraid of this, is especially at the audience level, you can't tell if I'm looking at your eyes or the top of your head, right? So looking at the tops of people's heads may make you feel a lot more comfortable because you're not looking at their eyes and they have no idea, you're looking in their general direction. So even though I say make eye contact, I would really view that as make somewhere near the face contact, because at this distance you can't tell. Identify a nodder, somebody who's like nodding off, stare at them because they're not looking back, right? But speak to him or her. Better yet, if you can find more than one of them, go between those people, right? It makes it look like you're engaging with the audience. They don't make your ears fearful. And better yet, see if you can wake them up, right? If you can really get to them, right, then you're getting your energy and stuff out to make them want to react. However, don't call them out. You sleeping in the front row, right? That's just not it. Do not focus on a friend. Okay, friends give you bad feedback. Friends will often look positive even when your talk is going a little bit off, right? You want to figure out the people who are losing you're losing them, so that you can figure out how to keep your pace right. Your friends will just be supportive and smile at you the entire time. Great job, you're doing horrible! But no, you want somebody whose visual feedback actually helps you. You want to watch for audience body language and questions. So if you see people going, right, you know there's a question on their mind. Now, you got to find a balance. So in the beginning, when you're really nervous, don't watch for body language. That's like level 2. You've now reached, okay, I can look for their body language, figure what's going on. Questions are not a problem. Lots of students are afraid of questions when they give their talk. Questions are a golden opportunity for you to interact with your audience. Okay, you want questions. You want to encourage questions during your talk. Briefly pause and ask for questions if it's appropriate. In your job talk, if you give a job talk, it is absolutely essential that you stop multiple times and ask the audience for questions. Because they're looking for someone who's not going to be giving a long-term lecture. They're looking for someone they're going to interact with this job. They want to hear that you care about what they think and where they're at. So you want to make sure you're stopping them. At a conference, it may or may not, right? If there's room after the sessions, you can, if you see people asking questions, you can say, if you have questions about this, come to my poster session, right? You just interject that here or there when you're getting it going. Be prepared to truncate your talk if you run out of time. Better to connect and not present all your material than to lose all of your audience. So if during your job talk somebody asks you questions and your hour job talk just lost 20 minutes to questions, or as a student, your first exercise in this may be your thesis proposal. I've had lots of students who, during a thesis proposal, they're like, no, I can't take questions now. I got to get through all this. Right? That is not really what your academic advisor and your committee members want to hear. Right? They're going to ask you questions then. If your advisor says, we want to hold all the questions to the end, half the faculty may listen, but the other half won't. You just have to deal with it. But better to make sure that you've covered those things well enough, because especially for your thesis proposal, we don't actually necessarily care as much that you cover everything, but that you know what you're doing, right? So we're going to see where that goes. Presenting your slides, it can be very annoying. To reveal your points, right, one by one, right, by one, unless there's a punchline someplace, right? So, and if you're going to do this, like, it's especially bad, like I did. I had to come over and touch this, right? If you're doing it with a remote, and you can be speaking to it. Now, there are times when this can be very effective, when your goal is this punchline. I want to hold the audience attention and keep it focused as I'm getting this one key point. But most of the time, it's not really good. It's very very, very, very annoying to use, especially, the built-in animation effects. As far as I can tell, they were there to tempt people so that other people can make fun of them for falling for that silly approach, right? There's really no good reason for most of the built-in. Now, that being said, I use animation all the time. Okay, so these I tend not to do. One of the reasons I will use them is in lots of places, our slides, like we are literally told for the talk I'm giving next week, we can have exactly 5 slides, right? So my slides now build with pieces. In fact, by the time the slide is done, it's really 4 slides, and I put them on top. So, but you want to be very careful how you're doing it, because you're trying to manage your audience's attention. Absolutely, without fail, finish on time. Right? So you should have a timer, you should know exactly where you're going. My recommendation is actually 2 timers. One that's on your screen, so you know where you're supposed to be. My other recommendation is you put a timer on your phone and put it in your pocket in vibrate mode, so it doesn't make noise. And you make it go off about 30 seconds before your talk's supposed to end. This way you will feel the vibration, I've got 30 seconds left. You don't want it to go off when the talk is over, because then you have no time to segue and say, what was great about this, and wrap it up. You want to give yourself enough notice that you know when it's about to end, which is different than looking at your screen. And you want something that prompts you. That's why vibrate is a good thing to put to make that happen. Audiences get resistive and essentially stop listening when your time is up. Continuing on is generally very counterproductive. We've been at places where, of course, we make the projector go off, just to okay, your time is up. 2 seconds over, boom, projector's gone. Right? Depends on where we're going to go. Simply truncate and conclude. It's like, with those questions, but better if you can make the segue make sense and get there. Don't ever ask, would you like me to go on? Right? You can say things like, I didn't get to cover everything, so if you want to talk one-on-one later, come find me, we'll talk, right? That's fine, but don't say, should I go on? The only time I would say that's okay is if you were late for some reason completely outside of your control, like the fire alarm went off during your talk. But then you don't even address it at the end of the talk. When you come back, it's like, okay, so what are we going to do? Should I finish up in 10 minutes? Should I finish up in 2 minutes? Right, 50 minutes going to go. So the good thing, the general standard is so low, you don't have to be outstanding to stand out as having given a good talk. Right? If you give an okay talk, you're probably above average, because so many of them are so bad. You will attend 50 times as many talks as you will give. Watch other people's talks intelligently, pick up the ideas, what you would do, what you would avoid. But probably the most important thing is just do it. Good papers and good talks are a fundamental part of research excellence. Invest time, learn skills, practice. Write a paper, give a talk on any idea, no matter how insignificant it seems to you. Find a group of other students. So a bunch of my students put together a machine learning Fridays, what do they do, right? Where they're all reading papers and they're giving like research talks to each other. Right? I'm not even invited. Actually, I guess it was invited, I just don't go. But I wasn't, so it's their research group, not mine, right? So, and I didn't want to put the pressure on them of feeling judged. I want to just get out there and practice what's going on. So, now, for those of you who are new students, it might be too late, but there's this thing called Mountain Lion Research Day. Did you guys know about Mountain Lion Research Day?
Yeah.
Did anyone apply?
No.
No. Okay. So good practice. You should apply.
It's ill-timed.
Yeah, well, that's a different problem. It's like finals week or something like that.
It's like in the middle of the day.
I will give Jesse more feedback on that. That was one of my comments. Was that first of all, it really shouldn't be like the last week of the semester. It's like too hard on students. Like,
Kind of the priorities, is not presenting my research to you for nothing.
Yes. Well, their view is like, well, we want students to be able to have a chance to finish their research. It's like, yeah.
So there's a lot of cool things that are offered. There's the present all your research in one slide, that pitch shark a day or something. But people are trying. It's just, it's hard to time yourself to be able to do that.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, if you do go to Mount Ryan Research Day, it's practicing for something a little bit different, which is the talk of how to give your talk to people outside your field is actually even more different. Because then you want almost no technical details, it's all motivation and impact. Right? So the 70% in the middle, and that's assuming you're talking to your field, not to people outside your field, in which case that becomes very small. So coming back to research is communication, right? your ideas are worthless if you keep them yourself. So crystallize your ideas, communicate them to others, get feedback, build relationships, and garner research some brownie points by giving this away. You will be surprised if you talk to your advisor, they can probably find a research group for you to give a talk to. Right? You can sit around and just talk about stuff, but you can say, well, I'll only get 3 or 4. So, and in this class, right, so some of you will present next week, some of you will present the week after, right? You're all going to get some practice presenting. So some talk preps. Know your presentation tool. If you know what you're going to do in PowerPoint, your video, whatever, choose the tool, make sure you really understand how to use it. Find some place to practice, right? This room is actually pretty much open. You can always come in here and steal a cable and practice it. You need a projector, you come see me. I got 4 or 5. We'll let you borrow a projector. You can take it home and practice whatever you want. Choose an aspect ratio. Does anyone know what that means and why it would matter?
Because each projector is either a 4:3 or one of the wide angles.
So we actually, so
Yeah.
Widescreen.
And you're
right, so
cut off
the
pictures
3
and
most
stuff.
common are 4x3, 16x10, and 16x9. These are the 3 most common projector sizes. And oddly enough, slides not intended for that particular thing don't look very good. Worse yet is if you go into PowerPoint and say, please rescale them for me, almost never works. I don't understand why PowerPoint can't figure out how to do that, but very often you'll just lose some of your space. So like 16:9 in a 4x3, you lose a top. 4x3 in a 16x9, you lose the sides, right? So it depends on which way you're going. So make sure you know what's going on. Also, my recommendation is you have your own set of connectors. I carry with me all kinds of connectors. In fact, the part that is funniest is I carry connectors for things that don't even fit my laptop. Right? And I've been to people who are like, why do you have that? It's like, well, it's like 2 ounces in my bag, and then I can show up someplace and I can help somebody make things work. I'm pretty good at all the AV stuff, and I'm just used to all these problems. So another thing is looking at fonts and colors. So fonts. What size fonts do you think you should be using in your talk?
No smaller than 20, if you can help it. I've gone down to 18.
So the recommendation that I use for my classes, for talks, is 1/2 the age of the oldest person in the audience. Okay? Or 1/2 the distance to the screen. Now this gets to be a little tricky. Distance to the screen in meters, right? If you're in a giant venue, but if you're in a giant venue, they tend to actually have multiple screens, so it's not like full width. But I've been in places where half the distance to the screen is actually more like 58-point font. That would be really rough. But so 36-point, right? If you have older people in the room, but as people get older, they simply don't see as well, and so they can't see the audience. That's why you go by the age, right? Avoid using all capital letters because it's much harder to read. Right? It might be okay for a font, a heading type of thing, but not. My recommendation is something in the, you'll notice the smallest I went down to here is 18, but 20, 24, 36, right? For a general audience, that's, okay. There's a secondary advantage of limiting yourself to 36-point font. What do you think that is? Besides it's more readable.
You don't talk to your slides.
Right.
You're forced to actually know
Well,
your
so-
subject, and it's just.
Well, the difference is you talk to your slides. You don't read your slides. Your slides are not to be read. For most people, reading and listening is not a simultaneous activity. They can read or they can listen, but they don't really do both. So I put a lot of words on the slide. A whole bunch of the audience is reading while you're there. So 36-point limits you to just the key words instead of all of this text. Now, and you can have some notes to yourself down here. So if you want a full script, put it down here. But again, if you practice enough, it won't matter. Okay, so colors. Dark letters against a light background, which is what you notice I use throughout this class, right? Those generally work better in bright environments, and they make reading better. Dark letters against a light background are best for small rooms, especially when the lights are on for teaching, and they're best for any dim projector. If you get to a venue that's got a super bright projector, or you want to be a little bit more artsy, or you're trying to make your images look good, which in my field is sometimes an important thing, light letters against a dark background can also work. Many experts feel a dark blue or a black background works best for talks in large rooms. It definitely gives the best perceived color and image differences, but it also has a much greater chance of sleeping. Right? Your audience is now in a dark area, which many of them associate with going to sleep. It's tough. Importantly, the colors on your screen are not how they project. Test color palettes on a projector. Check the actual projector you can, because you'd be surprised sometimes when you think this color looks great. So, the color, this is still a screen, not a projector, right? If this was projected, this bluish color fades out a lot more because most projectors don't do cyan, right? Well, right? So we really have two core color technologies: subtractive color, which is what displays do. We have red, green, and blue, and they subtract out colors, and additive colors, which is what projectors do, where they project 3 colors of light and do it. Right? So you get very different behaviors. Darker on dark is a bad idea, really bad idea. But light yellows and whites on dark colors can look very good, especially if you don't have too much of it, and then you have like an image or whatever. So it can be, if you're looking at GANs or whatever, and you're trying to talk about perceptual image quality,
right,
you might want to go down that path. You can easily have a talk that mixes these, where you go for a while with this, right? This keeps your audience awake. Text is easy to read, everything's good, and then you go to 1 or 2 of these dark backgrounds, right? You don't have to be consistent in the background, so you can do stuff right. Yeah, what makes it stand out, I'm trying to show you something, but also now it focuses the light on where you want to be. Talk timing. The shorter the talk, the more important it is you have the timing down very tight. As I recommend, auto time slides or videos for anything under 10 minutes, or if you're nervous, however long it's going to be. But it's important if you can do those that you can't be interrupted with questions, right? So you can't have a video playing or auto time slides and then say stop for questions. Right? We've talked about how we can give them a pause button, but I'm not skip these. I guarantee you, well, for most people, it may feel awkward at first because the slides go on without you. Right? But that's actually a good thing, right? You may feel people are staring at you, you have dead time because if you're in front or you're falling behind. But after you practice it a couple of times, it really doesn't take long before you get good at it. As I said, good to practice with distraction, things tossed at you. If you record a video with narration, you can practice via listening, right, a lot of times. Right? So you can literally be on the plane right out and listen to your talk 15 times, watching the slides, listening to it, and you'll memorize a lot more of it that way. But one thing about that is you want to beware of losing energy in the final talk. The one problem with self-talk, where you practice in your head as opposed to out loud, has 2 problems. First of all, you don't practice volume, energy, enthusiasm. And in my head, and my guess is in all of your heads, I can talk way faster than my mouth can physically move. Right? And so you're not getting the timing right. So I actually do recommend you do a couple of places where you, having listened to it or whatever, you practice out loud. And if you are somebody that struggles a little bit with pronunciation and energy, a trick, again, from my class at Columbia, was to practice with things in your mouth. So we used marbles, but we also found that milk duds worked well, something else. Right? So something that interferes with the normal functioning of your mouth, because it makes you focus on being loud or whatever. And of course, we would record ourselves and have to listen to it. Right? So that's another, by far, if you want to get better at making sure you're heard, put your phone across the room, practice your talk, and then listen to it on how well your phone heard it. Right? And that will give you a much better feel for how well you can do it. Copyrights and talks. For an academic venue, for most places, fair use applies. I don't have to go get permission to use it. However, it's good to have a reference on the source, at least in your notes, but ideally on the slide. So image from whatever, you never read those words, they're just on the slide someplace. Best to choose images with reuse rights in Google search. So if you don't know how to do this, when you search in Google under tools, there's a thing that says license type, and you can say search for reuse, reuse with modification, no license, whatever. Reuse with modifications or reuse just makes it really easy. Images and relevant clip art can generally greatly improve your talk. Weakly related images, art can distract, but it can still work, right? Because they give you something on the screen. Or the one thing I forget about copyrights and fair use. If your talk is being recorded and broadcast, then you may run into some issues. In particular, we record all of our talks for our main conferences, and we've had multiple takedown notices because we record them and we put them up on YouTube under monetization. So we had a couple of talks where to find balance, we had to turn off monetization because either the owner of the copyright material had to get all the money, or we had to not get any money at all. So we agreed to give them all the money we get by turning off monetization, and then they get all the money because we get none. But this is a particularly common when you have clips that YouTube will find. Right? So in our case, these weren't static images. These were video clips of TV shows, right? So there's both the audio and the video, and somebody's analyzing a TV show. It becomes very obvious then, and you'll get beat up for it. So a talk where you can connect your story, visualize it to all the pictures on every slide, is way easier for you to remember and for your audience to remember. So pictures actually help them remember better because they see visuals. Finding and creating good images takes time, but in the long run, it's really worth it. Once you find a couple of good things to make your story go, it'll help. If you want to get inspired, there's lots of good conferences have all their talks online. Watch some with friends and discuss what works and what doesn't. Okay. The good thing about conference talks is you can actually get lots of what doesn't work because there's lots of not very good talks. So you can sort of see here's what's bad. You want to watch some good talks. Look at some, especially the technically oriented TED Talks. These are really good. You don't get to be on the TED stage unless you're a good speaker. TEDx, maybe not, but TED, you just tend to be a good speaker. So 7 talk tips from some inspiring TED speakers. Immerse your audience in the story. If you can get them to feel your problem and they're part of it, they're way more likely to get involved. Tell an emotional or personal story. This is especially true when you're trying to engage your audience at the beginning. But if you can make this problem personal, right, even if they don't have the problem themselves, making it personal lets them empathize with why you're trying to solve this problem. Create suspense, right? There's a little bit of that. You don't want the whole suspense, but you want a little bit of it. You want to bring some characters to life in your story. These are the key elements. Show, don't tell. Much better if I can show you cool things or show you what's going on. Bring up a star moment. I'll get to that in just a second. And end with a positive takeaway. So the end of your talk, just like the end of your paper, is a call to action to build on your research work and go out and do something and make that happen. Nancy Duard, whose book Resonate, she's got lots of good stuff on presentations, right? So a star moment is something they'll always remember. That's what STAR as an acronym stands for. And somewhere in your talk, you want something that you think of as your star moment. And the more that star moment is related to your key idea, the more coherent your talk becomes and what they're going to remember, right? So it's about creating something that's significant, sincere, entertaining, whatever it is, that magnifies your big idea. It can be a memorable dramatization, repeatable sound bites, evocative visuals, emotive storytelling, shocking statistics, something that makes them say, I get this idea. It's even okay to use a little bit of hyperbole, as long as you admit it's hyperbole along the way sometimes. And this might be related to something else we talked about in this class, where we were talking about stories. What did we talk about? Anyone remember a particular acronym we had? Success, right? So everything about you say this, right? Coming back to what we called sticky stories, right? Sticky stories were simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional stories stick, right? So you want to aim for that, right? In your thing, you want to make parts of it very simple. There should be something unexpected, because if everything you're telling me is obvious, then why are you telling me everything? I don't really know. There should be at least 1 or 2 concrete things, and you got to build your credibility. Again, that's part of where your references come in. Emotional is always trickier in science, but it's possible, and that will help your things go. So that's my talk on giving talks. Any questions?